All right, to start off leading through stories today, we're going to play Helen's digital story. We are hoping that sound shows up, so if you don't hear anything, please throw it in the comments and we'll stop the 3-minute video.
She was terrified of thunder, but she didn't dare cry out. The thunder was better than the silent sound of dark. I would like to introduce you to her. She grew up believing that she was invisible, that she didn't matter, that she was unlovable, that there wasn't a place for her. She was desperate to escape her life, escape her emotions, escape her anxiety. A heavy sadness shadowed this child of the foster care system. She had been moved 8 times since birth between foster homes and her birth mother, until her adoption at 4.5 into a good family who were ill-equipped to look after her emotionally. They didn't know how to deal with a French-speaking little one who had learned a deep distrust of people. The system had failed her. The system had failed her forever family. The system had failed. And yet she was told to be grateful. No grieving allowed. Her life became increasingly confusing. She was filled with anger and on a path of extreme suspicion and wariness of all human beings. She created a mask to hide behind. It was exhausting. It had to be better somehow. For years, she bounced between depression and hope. There was hope in wanting a better life. I reached for her hand and assured her she could trust me. She hid behind me. It hit me like a ton of bricks. She didn't trust me. I did not trust myself to make it better. The little girl was me, and this woman was me, and we were the same person. I made a choice. It was time. With years of self-discovery, therapy, and difficult healing work, I saw that I indeed had a beautiful life. I embraced it despite the whispers and ghosts of the past. They will never leave me. I hold the power to change my perspective. I am not a victim. I cannot change the past. She is not invisible. She does matter. She is loved. There is a place for both of us.
Okay, let's see if I can get off of that. Oh, there we go. Hi, ladies.
Hello, hello.
Friends, welcome to Leading Through Stories. With me today, as always, is Helen Rose, who's passionate about grief, and you just saw her digital story. Mary Michelites, who's an educational leader, and of course me, Kristy Wolfe. I believe there's power in stories. For those of you joining us for the first time, we always have our show notes down below, and that's where we have information about who we are and why we're doing this Leading Through Stories experiment that we've been doing for like a year and a half now.
Wow.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Great.
All right.
So I guess before Kristy presents, we want to tell you a little bit more about her. She's an incredible human being, and we feel so blessed to be able to work with her and play with her. Kristy is a level 2 common language trained digital story facilitator. She works with individuals and social purpose organizations to create stories with impact. She just got back from an incredible journey in Guatemala, and she'll probably share a bit more about that a little later on. But after receiving her degree from the University of Calgary, she spent a number of years helping young minds discover and understand the world around them. She's passionate about photography, digital storytelling initiatives that come from her perspective as a medical mom. Never easy, and she still celebrates World Heart Day every year since her older son, Kane, came home from the hospital. She has a knack of keeping tiny human beings alive and spends evenings sharing hugs and bugs with her littles, a way to really connect with one another and share the events of the day in a natural way. A few last notes. Kristy lights up the room. For anybody that knows her, you know what we mean. She's inspirational. She calls herself a leisure athlete. I think she should give herself more credit. She has a husband, and lovingly describes her as relentless. And she is a relentless soul who makes a difference in everything that she does. Kristy, so honored to be with you here again today.
You know what's funny? That just having people read out your bio. Anytime that you're a speaker or they wanted to have a bio. So I've just been putting together a speaker proposal and like a package, like what you did for your retreats, right? And like really lay out the information. And we created that bio just recently. And so it's kind of the first one I've heard somebody say it. And I don't know, we tried to add some humor in because they can be so dry. But my husband really did call me relentless.
In a good way.
I was like, did you read the definition of the word relentless? And now I just actually think it's perfect.
It is perfect. And I love the relentless, but no, what is it? The leisure athlete. I think that's brilliant.
Can't take credit for that. That's Katie Burrell. She's a comedian from BC. I will send you a link. She's quite funny. And the leisure athlete thing really spoke to me.
It's great. Yeah.
But Helen, let's talk about your digital story.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you, Kristy. I am a storyteller. I am a writer. And when I sat down to do this, I was like, oh my God, it's like you say when you're writing your own bio, or you're writing your resume, you want it to be all the very best parts of you. And oh my gosh, is someone going to judge me? Is someone going to call it on me? So as you know, I was a little bit nervous at first. And, for those of you who know me, I'm not a woman of little words. I'm a woman of a lot of words. And so the challenge was to put what I wanted to say, but do it in such a way that it covers everything, if that makes any sense. And I would highly recommend anyone to do this digital storytelling. It is a beautiful work. It doesn't matter how many times I talk about my journey and how many times I've been in therapy and all of that. It made me feel very vulnerable to do it. Mm-hmm. But I also felt very powerful when it was done. It was, even, and I watch it and I think, oh my gosh, that sweet little thing, Yeah.
Well, and it's so I just want to explain a little bit about the process as well before we jump a bit more into what resonated for people. But with digital storytelling, level 1, I'm a level 2 trained facilitator, which means workshops, but level 1 is co-creating. So one-on-one. So if Mary and I decided to do a story, she might work with me 4 times for 2 hours each time to find the story, tell the story, craft the story, which is putting the pictures and video clips together, and then share the story. Helen did a workshop. So there was a group of people all creating their own individual stories. And so that was a different experience too, because that was actually the first workshop I ran in person. And so it was really neat to get the feedback of how people kind of tell their story when they're in a group. But what I really loved about it was the fact that there was other people that you got to bounce the story off of, and like those storytelling circles, right?
And it's important for you too, is to know is that you get it. You get the story. Like you were really good at honing it down and no nonsense. Which, she's kind of bossy. I'm just going to say.
You get 200 to 400 words. Don't keep writing. Figure out what you want to say. Yeah.
And it's beautiful because you don't make the person feel like they're not doing properly. Like you're just so inspiring and just you get it. It's a beautiful. I'm so glad you found your niche here, Kristy, because you're a natural at it. And I'm not saying that because I love you, but it's true, right?
And I think part of the other piece is, as you said earlier, Helen, you can share many, 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 many words, but how do we really actually have somebody who gives us a little bit of feedback to say, might you think about, or how about? And I know that, Kristy, you don't direct what the story is going to look like, but you really synthesize and make it a very concise package, 2.5 minutes of who we are. So your feedback process, and it goes back to I think I'm going to just make the parallel there, Kristy, from your education, background, and really looking at how do we capture our thinking on paper in a concise and creative way.
Well, and I can't take credit for this, quite honestly. Mike Lang, who founded Common Language, is the one who's done the PhD in digital storytelling and brought all this information together, and really has taken a lot of time to consider ethical implications as well as storyteller well-being. And so I'm not going to talk too much about the process here, because if people who are watching this are interested, I put on an info session every month or every second month that's just free for people to find out more, because digital storytelling is confusing. But to kind of narrow it down, it's a 2 to 4 minute movie that's created using a moment from a storyteller's life that they write about, that they voice. So it's done in their own voice. They're reading their 200 to 400 words. It can be personal photos or stock photography or video clips. And then there's music put behind it. So that kind of gives you that feeling of what that looks like, because a digital story, again, can mean a million different things. But if you want to know more, those info sessions are an hour and a half long. We watch a couple stories. We talk about the process. So that's a better place to kind of find out a bit more about that. And my next one is coming up on March 22nd. So we will put a link for how to sign up for that if you are interested. But Helen, you talked a bit about what it was like to create that story. But I'm also wondering if there's things like, how did you feel sharing that story with us? Because you shared it with the group of storytellers you created it with, and it's kind of been out there in the world, but you just watched it now with Mary and I. How does it feel when other people are watching it with you?
It still feels vulnerable because it's such a personal story. Obviously, it's about my life. And I've come so far from the beginning. And I mean, I've got a book out about it. And I just hope that I inspire people to whatever their experiences were. I didn't experience the worst. I didn't experience the best. I think that's the case for most people. And I still feel vulnerable. And that little girl inside of me sees those sweet little pictures. And it makes my heart go out. And it's my story. And I'm never arrogant about it. I think I want people to see it. And it's not about feeling sorry or any of that kind of stuff. It's more about, yes, you are in control of your life. Yes, you can have the life you want.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mary.
It's interesting, Helen, as you share this, we all three of us have read 53 Grove, your incredible book about your life. And so having kind of reviewed that again and listening to your almost 3-minute digital story, for me, one of the things that stood out was how you've embraced resilience. How do you become resilient in everything that you do, that you see, that you're exposed to? And I love the title, Hold My Hand. Tell us a little bit about your title and why you chose that.
Well, that is such a great question. So through my therapy, I had realized, it had been pointed out to me, that I always referred to her, and I would quite often kind of motion towards as if there was another person in the room. And the therapist said, that's why I say in the thing is, Helen, you are that little girl. Mm-hmm. You need to bring her here. And I think just from the work that I've done with clients, it's a very powerful way to get people to hold their hands of their little selves, because we still are all in there. And yes, you can heal. And yes, you can work through all of that crap that you've been through. And again, it's not about the worst case scenario. It could be anything. It's a divorce. It's a loss of a job. It's a change. It's grief. And so if we would stop separating ourselves from that little person, the power is, and that's why it's Hold My Hand. And it is just bringing that little person here and knowing you're okay. You don't have to default to that time when you felt powerless. And that picture at the end is actually my daughter-in-law and my oldest granddaughter. And when she had sent me that picture just because, and it just hit, boom. You're always walking along with your little self.
I love the self-talk piece. As we talk with our kids or our students or some of the clients that I'm working with, what is our self-talk? And how do we affirm our journey, right? No judgment, but that self-talk. So thank you for sharing that. I love the title. I love your
Thanks, Mary.
resilience. and the skills and strategies that you've used to continue to be resilient. So thanks, Helen.
Yeah, and you raise a good point. Is you're always, when you get to a time in your life when something is, you're starting to feel like you're not in control, or you're feeling a bit powerless about whatever's going on around you. Yes, feel those things, that those emotions that go along with it, but also really hold your little self. Your little self doesn't need to be in charge anymore. That's where you change your survival skills. We no longer need, like I always, when I do my speaking, I always talk about, used to carry a gas can and a pack of matches with me, and I just blow everything up when I felt out of control. It's like, no. So now one of the tools I've learned is just to wrap myself in a warm blanket and deep breathe, and it's going to be okay. And it never fails. But that's part of that hold your hand too. Don't let your former self be in control when you weren't in control. No one should let a 3-year-old be in charge. Just saying.
Tiny terrorists, those 3-year-olds.
Yeah, totally. Storm in a teacup, right?
Yeah. And I wanted to kind of bring it back to the fact that so many of the stories, I would say 95% of the stories that I've worked on with people, whether it's in workshop or just co-creating or my own personal stories, tends to focus on some moment that you could take as a negative. Right? Yep. A moment of change in your life where things all of a sudden were thrown at you, something happened. But also so many of them turn that around into, and here's where I am now. And just focusing on the positive side of things. Yep.
Well, and you cannot grow without that falling apart, for lack of better words, that's where the growth comes. If it were always so easy, how could you possibly grow? And so even if you're speaking, if you listen to anybody who's speaking, any keynote speakers who have lost their legs in climbing accidents, or they will always 100% say, if I could go back and change it, I wouldn't. And that is where the power lies, right? Despite what happened. So you're absolutely right. I think they call that the hero's journey. Is, it is this cycle of changing when you're not maybe wanting to, or not knowing that you need to, and then when you do it, you blossom, you become and it's like the once born twice born person. The once born just kind of stays where they're at. The twice born goes into the unknown and doesn't want to turn back, even though they recognize that. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. And I think about it from like the post-traumatic growth kind of side of things with like Martin Seligman's work, and just I think that's what got me through with Kane early on, was just that thinking. I started looking into a lot of positive psychology and like, how do you reframe these things so that you can see the positive in a situation. And I think that that's easy to see in your story. It's easy to see with the images you chose, where it right in the middle of the story where the music changes and you have little you, and then it morphs into big you, and then you start talking about, and you had pause there intentionally. You put a pause in the talking, so people really just focused on the images and the different feelings you get from the way the words are spoken, the way the images move, the way the music comes in. You use 2 different songs to get totally different feelings throughout that video. And it all comes across to kind of leave the viewer with a sense of hope at the end, for sure. And I don't know, I love the way you can really get feelings across in a digital story.
Absolutely. And, it's easy. And I mean, aside from I could have a 20-minute digital story, but it would lose its impact, I think.
Yeah.
And, it's easy to be the victim. And I, constantly telling clients that it's so easy to be the victim. Poor me, look what happened. But stop. It's an opportunity for you to grow. And I'm not saying all situations are positive. Of course they aren't. There's some horrible things that happen. And I think that's the question. How do you find the positive in the most horrific things that have happened? How do you do that? And the trick is, it comes from here to do it. It's not anyone else that can tell you. Yeah. So in a digital story, like I've been to your screening nights, and every night, every time I cry, and it's just so powerful and inspirational, every single one of those stories.
Not selling it, Helen, not selling it.
Oh, no. No, it's a good cry. But it's a release of what someone else is watching that, and it may not be the same situation, but the emotions are the same as what I should say sorry, Kristy.
No. It's
Yeah.
perfect because that's true. Like when
Yeah.
the last time we had a digital story screening, I handed out tissues because I
Yep.
realized like, here's a little forewarning that these can be tough. And one of our audience members, the first time we did an in-person screening, said it's like a car wash for your soul.
Oh,
I'm like,
beautifully
wow.
said, hey?
yes, I
Yeah.
loved that. I use it all
Yeah.
the time now. Mary, what
Yeah.
were you going to say?
So, Kristy, I have a couple of questions for you. Like, obviously, this is a passion of yours, and you have an ability to really extract, narrative from a situation and turn it around because of your experience with Kane. I mean,
Yeah.
you model what you have expected of yourself, and you do that so beautifully. You're also exposed to so many interesting and very challenging stories. How do you support not only yourself through some of these very difficult stories, and they're not all difficult, but some of them are very difficult. How do you support yourself through that? Because I think you're doing two things. One, probably reliving Kane's, heart surgeries and trying to kind of think, okay, what would I've done? What would I've said? And what image might have helped? And because for me, one of the things that stands out when you did your story with your mom and the visual of the clock, I mean, I listened to that and I'm thinking that photo is etched in my brain for a number of reasons. So how do you keep it? How do you keep it alive together without it emotionally, draining you?
So I have a background, as you guys know, in education, but I also have training as a peer mentor. So I have done a lot of work with talking with people. And I do really feel like the process of digital storytelling, and Mike would tell you the same thing, is about standing beside people as they're talking. So a story that, for example, my mom told 6 years after my dad died, versus a story 1 year after would look very different. Like you almost have to be removed from that experience to have the ability to look back at it. So although you can tell a story that's like closer in time frame, it can be harder if you haven't actually worked through it. It does. Working through a digital story brings up a lot of emotions that maybe you even thought you had put to bed. So for the storyteller, one of the things that we do is I'm there talking, but right from the beginning, it's talking about storyteller well-being. If you need to leave and walk away from this story, that is okay. You do not have to finish this, or it can change if it needs to be something different. It's about checking in at the end of each session. Okay, how are you doing? Do you have somebody that you can talk to in case this brought up a lot of things for you? Is there someone you can just have a conversation with later today or in the next couple of weeks before I see you again? And then for me, there's a lot of power in just being there to support somebody else. I find like between exercise and sleep and connecting with people, I usually manage those stories pretty well. And I also find that people don't want to put the very worst things out there. They want to tell like the thing that happened, but they're not, we don't go into like anything that's going to harm someone else. So one of the tenets as we're talking about digital storytelling is really do no harm. So I ask people to think about the images they're going to show. If there are other people, do you have consent to use those images of those people? That's why stock photography can come in really handy sometimes, because you might be trying to tell a story that you don't have permission to use those images, or you don't want those people to be seen in that image. When you're writing your story, not including really personal information, not including the names of places that can tie it. If there's going to be like, if there's a possibility that it might not be the best intentions or somebody might take it as a harmful story. So those are constantly conversations that we're having, because the hope is that this process will help you to kind of finalize this story. Often they can be used for many different purposes, but I've had storytellers just do it for themselves. The story never got shared with an organization, never got shared publicly, but it was just a story that they could tell and work through it and kind of almost put some closure on it. And so I think like, I also tell people, like Helen's now done one story with me. She absolutely could go tell any story she wants to. She has the skills, especially in a workshop, because you're using a program called WeVideo, and she could go and do this again. But I don't recommend people doing it the first time on their own, because it does take a lot of conversation and back and forth that about like how to do this. And even if I think back to when I was just learning how to do this, it took me a couple stories to really get it. And I'm still learning 2 years later about like, okay, this is now how I'm going to do this to make this a bit better. Or if I'm working with an organization, I'm going to say, hey, can we put in a storyteller honorarium, because they are giving you a lot of time. They are getting something out of it, but they're also giving you a lot of time. So I don't know, a couple thoughts there.
30 seconds. Wow. What kind of stories have you been involved in? I know you did some work with the Zebra Child Protection Center. I know you did some work with Helen. Can you give us a list? Like if I'm listening in, I'm probably thinking, what can I tell my story on, and what kind of stories would we capture?
Well, and before answering that, Kristy, I have a point to make. And Mary just brought it up. Is like, don't ever think your story doesn't matter. And I think you hear that a lot, because I remember thinking, I think I said to you, well, I'm tired of talking about this. Who's going to care? Right? Yeah. Is that something to consider? Like, don't ever be afraid to tell your story. It is your story. Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be something big. Like, one of the stories that I share is Hugs and Bugs. And although it ties back to like some of the medical stuff in our life, it is really just a story about, at the end of the day, talking about what was a positive in your day, who was kind to you, what you're grateful for. So just thinking about, even if it's like something in your family or that is important to you, you can turn that into a story. It does not have to be some traumatic event to do. And I think even, especially when people are getting trained as level 1 facilitators, I know I've had this conversation a few times now. Don't pick a story that is really hard and really personal when you're learning how to do this, especially if you're going to teach other people. Save that story, learn how to do the process of working on a digital story, learn how to work with somebody else on a digital story, but do it with a story that's not like the story you're thinking of. Does that make sense? Because it makes it just that much more personal and hard to get through. Keep it something simple. Like the first story I told was about leaving Kane and Harrison at the emergency room so I could go do the digital storytelling level 1 workshop, where I would normally be the parent at the hospital. It was hard for me, but I also knew this was something that I really wanted to do, and I needed to make space for that. And it turns out I really did need to make space for it, because just based on what you've said, like, I agree, this is something that I'm very passionate about. When I think about the stories that I tell, there's different ones. Definitely personal stories. So people might have their own story. And just in that group at the Arts Place workshop that we did, there was one about starting a business. One was about journaling. One was Helen's. And then the fourth one was about a mom in palliative care. And so it was kind of this palliative care, leaving the hospital story. And so all of those were 4 completely different types of stories. So one-on-one with individuals, but also I find often an organization will come to me. So I am just finishing a story with the Lead Foundation in Calgary, and they've had a couple different parents who have used their services, and it's that kind of PUF funding supports for young children with different abilities. And so they've asked different storytellers or different parents from within their organization to tell a story about what that's like. Recently, I spoke at the University of San Diego's Nonprofit Institutes conference, and it was very, very much about how to tell stories for nonprofits that aren't just like the end user story of like, here's how we help this person, and then they tell like this story, which is great. But there's also all these stories from the volunteers with your organization. Why are they involved? The board members, why are they involved? So you brought up Zebra. Zebra did a story of the day in the life of one of their therapy dogs, which was really a neat idea. But there are so many other stories and so many people. Every person there is involved for a reason. What are those reasons? And if you think about attracting board members, attracting volunteers, attracting staff, how do you tell the story of what your organization is all about to share that? And I think those personal stories really, really bring people in like that. So yeah, those are a couple. I mean,
no passion shown.
No passion. I can't shut up.
We
were just talking. Tonight is actually a virtual story screening. So if anybody wants to watch a few more digital stories, there's 4 stories being shared. And that's a big part of digital storytelling, is how do you actually share the story? So 4 different storytellers are coming on tonight. They're each sharing a story because it's Heart Week right now, Congenital Heart Disease Awareness Week. They're all related to hearts. So one is a cardiac parent. One is a young adult with congenital heart disease. One is a cardiologist, and one is a cardiac parent who is also a cardiac nurse. And like,
Wow,
these
that's
stories,
powerful. That's
right?
incredible. Yeah.
And that
Incredible.
community. Yeah.
You're going to do wonderful things with this for so many people. I'm so proud to know you. Really, honestly, we are
Ditto.
behind you 100%. Like, I'm so proud to listen to your passion over this. You really are amazing at it. Yeah. Wow.
Thank you. I need to hear that because I just left my family for a week to go to Guatemala, as was mentioned earlier. And in 2 weeks, I'm going to Uganda to support Mike in doing a digital story training over at the University of Mbarara, which is really exciting.
Cool.
But it's hard when you have littles.
Yeah.
And like, I am leaving the family, and there's quite a few things coming up that are making it hard for me. I wonder if there's a digital story there about like.
I was going to say, I think a digital story is up and coming, coping and responding.
But because and you know what, to that point, is there totally is a story there. There's women who have littles that are also very career oriented. And can you have both? And the answer is yes. But how do you navigate it? Right.
Yeah. So that's definitely
Kristy.
the thing that's in my mind right now.
Superstar. Will you remember us when you're famous?
Well, I'll be sharing stories, so everybody's welcome. What I love is that I can share my story. So I will share a digital story when I'm doing a presentation as like almost a bio. Here's a little bit about me in whatever context. I have 4 right now that I've done personally. And then using that as a way to introduce digital storytelling, but also introduce me to people if they don't know me. And then getting to show a couple different stories based on the audience and what they're there for. Like, sometimes it can be hard because you don't have any idea, like they're coming from all different walks of life. But tonight's, the people that are coming are either interested in digital stories or they're interested in cardiology. And that's the crossover. Next week, I present at the Palliser Teachers Convention. So for that, it will be more geared to teachers or children, using photos, that kind of thing. So yeah, just really being conscious of who it is you're talking to. And I love talking about it. So
I think, the statement for me is, how do we convey our story effectively, efficiently, and through the lens of engagement? And Kristy, thank you for sharing, your work through the lens of Helen and, Hold My Hand digital story. It's just so refreshing, so very refreshing.
Beautiful work. Yep.
And so the thing that I would kind of leave people with is also to think about what story they would want to tell. Thinking about, and often when I'm working with, especially like info sessions where people are just coming to learn a bit more, thinking about a negative moment in your life and a positive moment in your life. And do those 2 things overlap in any way? And really trying to pare it down to and narrow it down to a moment. Don't think about, because it's easy to, well, it's not easy, but like chronologically here, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And that might be a starting spot. But can you think about one moment and really take that moment and teach the viewer about like what it was like to be there, using pictures, using words.
And it's important, and it's back to earlier, it's quite easy to vilify someone, and it's quite easy to make someone an angel. So when you're going through that journey with whatever the situation is what for every negative, there's always a positive, and that evens it out and it keeps it real, versus, because it is easy to vilify someone. And that's what, when I'm writing my second book, I did that to my mother quite easily. And now that I've matured quite nicely, maybe a little bit, all of a sudden I'm like, oh man, it's like, damn, she was just a person too, with her own things, right? And so it's really important to tell those stories where you find the compassion, and when you forgive, and when you've walked your grief journey, it's really important. So this is really powerful work. This isn't just about telling a story. The feelings you get from walking through that is incredible. Yeah.
Well, and that's
an hour long.
The product side of it, like the finished digital story is one piece of it, and the process is another piece of it. And I think when I'm sitting down, especially with an organization or a group that's going to tell more than one story, it is about like okay, what is the most important thing to you right now? Is it the product? Is this what you need? Because sometimes organizations do need stories for fundraising and all of these different purposes. And is that what we're aiming for? Are we aiming for a really finished product, or are we doing this work so that you have this process that your group is going through? And often it's a bit of both. Like they would like to have the final story for their purposes, but it is about also supporting those storytellers. And one more thing I wanted to mention is just this idea of informed consent, that Helen has chosen to share her story. And right now it's hosted on my YouTube so that she has a place that can easily share it for Leading Through Stories. But it is Helen's choice. If she doesn't want that posted, then we take it down. If she wants to share it with an organization, it is her story. It's not my story. If she shares it with an organization and then tells them she doesn't want them to have it anymore, it is her story. So regardless of whether an organization is funding it, it is the storyteller's story. And they might find that at the end of the process, they've got this amazing digital story, and the digital story seller says, I'm not comfortable sharing it. And that's a risk. And I try and bring it up right from the start, because although it hasn't happened often, it is something to consider, that like, in the end, would you be comfortable putting on this workshop and having 6 people tell a story and not having all of them to use? Is that something that you can do? So it is kind of a risk that I do talk about. Okay. So take back, bring back, because we know I could talk forever. Info session, March 15th is the next one. They're free to sign up for. They're virtual. They're an hour and a half. We watch a couple digital stories and we talk about the process. So if you are interested, that would be a good starting spot without just jumping in and finding out how much it costs. The other kind of thing that you could do is tonight, it's February 15th today, I am running a digital story screening. This is the Heart one we were talking about. The link to register is in our Linktree bio. It's also on all of my own personal, I don't know, all the social media platforms. Yeah, everything, all the things. And then just really a challenge to think about, what story would you tell? You don't need to be ready to tell it. You don't need to tell it. But I find like I have probably 6 stories going at various stages that maybe they will never be finished. I have no idea, but when I come back to it, it's there. So yeah. As for the next episode, March 15th is our next Leading Through Stories, episode 7, and we will announce our storyteller, or not our storyteller. Now I'm stuck in that lingo. We'll announce our guest closer to that day. So expect all this stuff in a takeaway email. Feel free to share it. There'll be the podcast version as well. But ladies,
it's lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Grateful for both of you, as always.
Thank you, Helen. Helen, thank you for sharing your digital story.
Yeah,
and Kristy, the foundation that you've created where it's easy to tell your narrative. So what an honor to be listening to the two of you today talk about the impact that this has made.
Yeah. Thanks.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us.